how strong. The Yagi antenna is built like this. If it's two elements, and its radiator is here, its driven element is here, the radiation pattern is shooting this way. This one is with the antenna pointed. This is actually looking down on it with the elements of the beam pointed in this direction. The three element, you would have the driven element in the middle, you have a radiator and a director. When I get to Yagi antennas, I will explain the size differences.
And I think your director is going to be on the side where the big loop is rather than...
Yes. And you have front-back and you have front-side ratios. If you're in emergency communications and you're point-to-point and you're two fixed points that only need to talk to each other, this is a good antenna. If you're net control and you need to talk to disparate people in many different areas, that's a terrible antenna because the people off the side won't hear you and the people behind you can hear you somewhat, but not as well as the people you're pointed at. A two-element beam is not as directive as a three-element beam. You can notice the width of the outgoing lobe. That defines how narrow or broad your point is when you're aiming at people. So,
the same basis as most of the new television antennas, not Red Deers, but the directing antennas.
They're also log periodics.
Yes, I know.
And they have corner reflectors and all sorts of things.
But most of them you get are going to be Yagis.
Yagi.
Yagi.
Mr. Miyagi. Takeoff angle is another thing. Well, I will point it out, but it's the vertical aspect of antenna radiation. When I showed you the quarter-wave vertical and we looked at the lobes, the takeoff angle is the strongest lobe and the strongest point of the strongest lobe. That's the angle that it prefers to work at. It can work at other angles.
So is that you can find in the, if you just look at the diagram that says 15 degree takeoff or 10 degree or?
You're going to have to look at it and define it yourself. But some of the software and modeling will say here's where the strongest point is. You might have to hit a button or toggle somewhere, but it will tell you. Strongest lobe is good. But takeoff angle can be changed by your surroundings. Say you're on the edge of a canyon or on a cliff, your takeoff angle actually gets pulled down because the takeoff angle is in relationship to the ground around you. And grounds change too, so dry grounds, rocky grounds, sandy grounds, or wet grounds like a marsh, you get near field effects and it changes the takeoff angle again. When you model them with the software, you have to tell it what kind of ground you have. But in some contests when you're out in the field, or you're out in the field for an emergency communications exercise or the real thing, you might want to think about your surroundings and take advantage of lowering the takeoff angle. For most cases, you don't want to have a high takeoff angle for ecom. It's great if you want to talk to somebody in Wyoming, but you're not going to talk to them here. There's times when I can talk to somebody in DC, but I can't talk to Beaverton. That's not really good for ecom.
Except for NIVIS applications in HF.
In HF, then you might actually want to lower your antenna to take advantage of that, because normally with a dipole you want it to be at least half wave or more above the ground, to be as much in free space as possible. To use NVIS, lower your antenna and you'll get more and more of your lobe upward. And then you can take advantage of, where is it? That, if you have a vertical, you can take advantage of those upper lobes for NVIS. But how many of you have a 40, right now you need an 80 meter vertical. They're pretty tall. Oh, here's your monopole again. So this is going to kill you. Here's your vertical, and here's your lobes. Here's where the maximum radiation is. So if you put it on a chart, you'll see that's the takeoff angle. So now, if you could turn this upside down, if my software won't do that, all of pointing down at the negative of that angle. So if you're on, say, Mount Hebo, that would be advantageous. I talked about grounds, but different soil types make a big difference. Dry soils are more forgiving than wet soils. We're going to talk about near field and far field interactions, but this is one of them. Ground, what type of ground you're on. For NVIS applications, you don't really want to have a wet ground because you're losing so much power, it's actually sucking the power right into the ground. When I was a kid, we had walkie-talkies that worked great until one of us would walk on the other side of the stream, and it was like a switch. It was gone. As soon as he walked 10 feet just on the other side of my side of the stream, he was back again. And then if he got on the far side of the valley on top of the ridge, I could hear him again. But if he was close to the stream or in the marshy area, he was gone. I could yell at him better.
Why would that be? Because you have ground losses, and presumably wet ground would have a lower resistance
Yes,
for,
it does.
for the ground currents. Why would that be?
It just sucks the RF right down into the ground.
Because it's so conductive.
Yes.
Then why
It
is salt?
attenuates the signal.
And that's in,
It attenuates the signal.
yeah, attenuates. So this, we're talking near field then, right?
If you're on a salt plane, it's great. It will lower your takeoff angle. So instead of your quarter wave, lots of people use phase verticals on a salt marsh area. It lowers your takeoff angle. So you get great DX, but you're not being able to use it for NVIS. You can't shoot straight up because basically your electric waves are, the electric field lines are going into the ground. They're all curving, and just it really loves going back into the ground because it's such a good conductor.
But at far field is like water and salt water especially, is that at far field very advantageous?
It depends on what you want to do.
Or DX.
Yes, it's great for DX.
I was
Yes.
thinking DX.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you go to the coast and sit on 101 in one of the lookouts there,
Mhm.
and put an antenna up in that lookout, and you're shooting west towards Japan or something, you'll get a lot better
Yeah.
antenna performance than you would if you're trying to shoot from over here.
If you do the same thing from the beach, it'll be even better.
It will.
And you'll
That's
get
true.
into the center of Asia, or
Mhm.
even Europe,
Mhm.
of the long path. Wet hemlock trees, yeah, it's just bad. Height above ground, half wavelength or more. Quarter wave verticals are strange though, because you actually need to put a ground. This is a mag mount if it was all put together. And it uses a metal cookie sheet or the roof of your house, or if you have a metal house, or top of your vehicle. And that's your ground plane. What happens with a quarter wave vertical is you get an image effect of the other part of the dipole, which doesn't exist, half wave dipole, forms an image down here electrically. You also have the problem of, since you're feeding it from this point, it wants to be a dipole. It wants to be a half wave dipole. It thinks it's a half wave dipole, except this other half doesn't exist except as an image in the ground, whatever kind of ground, your radials, counterpoise, or ground plane you make. And you only get half of the effective radiated power because this image is in phase with this, so you're not gaining anything. This is a compromised antenna in many ways, and I will show you. You might want to use a J-pole. That's a 5/8 back there.
Yeah, maybe.
I think so.
It's a,
It's long enough to be on.
The J-pole and the 5/8 waves are much better antennas than this. So if you're in a fixed location, don't use one of these unless it's all you got. You'll notice well, we'll get to this in a second. Radials and counterpoints, as I mentioned those, and you might have seen them if you've mounted a quarter wave vertical on your pole outside your house, and that 5/8 wave back there has drooping stubs coming out here, which are 1/8 wavelength, I think.
probably, yeah, they're about 8.
Yeah.
I think they're about 1/8 wavelength. And what that causes